Ex filed a restraining order to ruin my reputation. Said it's your word against mine. I found footage of her stalking me, got the order reversed, and had her charged with perjury. Now she has a criminal record. I was at Mark's Coffee Corner, my usual stop just a block from the construction firm I worked at, zoning out over my coffee and trying to make sense of the day ahead. It was one of those Thursdays that felt like a Monday. My inbox was flooded with requests, deadlines were looming, and to top it off, I had a splitting headache from a late night. I was lost in thought when I felt a presence hover beside me. "Danny," a familiar voice whispered. I looked up, squinting into the eyes of Will, my coworker and friend, a guy who'd never been known for his tact. "Morning," I muttered, sipping my coffee, barely glancing up. Yeah, morning." He trailed off, scratching the back of his neck, which was never a good sign. Will only got cagey like this when he had bad news. "Listen, did you see this?" He handed me his phone, screen open to Facebook. I blinked, reading the post, and my stomach twisted as the words sunk in. After years of harassment and threats, I finally filed for a restraining order against Daniel. It's been a nightmare, but I had to take a stand. I deserve peace, and nobody should have to live in fear like this. The post was from Rena, my ex-wife, a woman I hadn't spoken to in years. The words blurred as my mind reeled. This was insane. I handed the phone back, hands shaking. "What the hell is this?" Will winced, shoving the phone into his pocket like he was afraid it might explode. "I don't know, man. I don't know. But people are commenting. Look." He scrolled through the comments. People I hadn't heard from in years were chiming in with support, sympathy, and a fair share of not-so-subtle digs at me. "I'm telling you, I haven't talked to her in, 3 years?" I looked at Will, hoping he'd believe me, but the doubt was written all over his face. "Danny, I don't know what's going on," he said slowly. "But this isn't good. People around the office have seen it. Our boss, too. It's not great." I looked around, feeling the eyes of everyone in the cafe. Even strangers seemed to be whispering, sneaking glances at me. This was insane. Utterly insane. For the next few days, my life was like living in quicksand. The harder I tried to clear my name, the deeper I seemed to sink. I called Doug, my lawyer and the one person I knew wouldn't immediately assume the worst. Doug was no nonsense, mid-50s, and had the expression of a guy who'd been through every courtroom nightmare imaginable. When I told him about the restraining order and Rena's post, he didn't even flinch. "Danny," he said, scribbling something in his notebook, "unfortunately, this happens more than you'd think. Restraining orders can be used as a tool to hurt someone's reputation, particularly if there's little evidence required upfront. It's more common than you'd imagine. But I haven't done anything. I haven't spoken to her in years, Doug. Years." Doug looked up at me, eyes sympathetic but firm. "It doesn't matter if you haven't talked to her since the Reagan administration, Danny. If she filed, she must have some kind of evidence or story to back it up, even if it's thin." He looked me over, gauging my frustration. "Listen, we'll file to have the order reversed. You have a good reputation, a stable job, no record, you're in good shape. It just may take some time." Time. Right. Time while Rena spun her story, while people believed her lies. I thanked Doug and left his office, my mind racing, wondering if there was any way out of this mess that didn't involve me standing in a courtroom while my ex painted me as some kind of monster. For the next few days, I lived in a state of dread. Everywhere I went, it felt like people were whispering. Julie, my girlfriend, who had been nothing but understanding through this nightmare, started asking cautious questions. "Danny," she said one night, while we were sitting on the couch. She looked down, twisting the corner of a pillow between her fingers. "I know you've explained everything, but it's just crazy. I don't know Rena that well, but do you think she's capable of all this?" I put my head in my hands, barely able to keep the frustration out of my voice. "Julie, listen. I know it's hard to understand, but she's lying. This whole thing is a fantasy. I have no idea why she'd do this." Julie nodded, but her brow was creased, and I knew the doubt was there, simmering under the surface. And how could I blame her? When your ex-wife is all over social media claiming you're some kind of dangerous maniac, even the people who know you best start to question things. Then came the night that changed everything. It was a Friday, late, and I'd been out with some friends, hoping to drown my anxieties with a few beers. The drive home was dark and quiet, the kind of silence that presses down on you like a weight. As I made my way through the empty streets, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Then I noticed it, a black sedan in my rearview mirror. I took a left, the car followed. I took a right, it followed again. My stomach twisted. Rena had accused me of stalking, but here I was, being tailed. Was it her? Was she following me? Heart pounding, I pulled into a grocery store parking lot, watching the car as it rolled slowly into a spot just a few spaces down. I stayed in my car, watching, waiting. The windows were tinted, but I could just make out a figure, a shadowy outline trying to stay low, avoid being seen. I pulled out my phone, shaking, and started recording. The next morning, I marched into Doug's office, video in hand. Doug watched the footage with a low whistle, his eyes gleaming with something close to satisfaction. "You might just have your case, Danny," he murmured. "This could turn the whole thing around." And it did. With the video in hand, Doug filed to have the restraining order reversed, claiming that Rena had actually been stalking me. It was a long shot, but it was our only shot. In court, Rena showed up with her lawyer, a guy who looked like he'd walked straight out of a law drama on TV, all slicked back hair and smug expressions. Rena herself was dressed to look the part of a victim, wearing a conservative sweater and glasses that she certainly didn't need. She barely looked at me as her lawyer launched into a monologue about my obsessive behavior. But then Doug stood up, and with a calm, methodical tone, he played the video for the judge. The courtroom went silent as the footage showed Rena's car tailing mine through the night, turn after turn. The judge looked at her, his face hardening. "What do you have to say about this, Ms. Cole?" he asked, voice flat and unyielding. Rena stammered, something about just happening to be in the area, but it was clear she had been caught. The judge ruled in my favor, reversing the restraining order. Rena's lawyer looked like he'd just swallowed a lemon as he realized their case had just gone up in smoke. But it didn't stop there. The judge, clearly suspicious, ordered a further investigation. Over the next few months, Rena's lies began to unravel. Witnesses came forward, people she had confided in, people who had seen her tracking my movements, who had heard her boasting about getting revenge on me. It turned out she had fabricated nearly every detail of her story, and the judge wasn't about to let her get away with it. By the time it was all over, Rena had been charged with perjury and slapped with a hefty fine. She even served a few weeks in county jail. I thought I'd feel a rush of satisfaction, a sense of justice finally being served, but all I felt was exhausted. Drained. Julie and I went to a quiet cafe to celebrate after it was all over. She reached across the table, her hand warm in mine. "I'm so sorry you went through all this, Danny," she said softly. "I never doubted you." "Not really." I squeezed her hand, offering a tired smile. "Thanks, Jules. I don't think I realized how deep her anger went. Or maybe I just didn't want to see it." Julie leaned back, her eyes thoughtful. "I guess, sometimes people change in ways we can't predict. But at least you can put this behind you now. She can't hurt you anymore." And maybe she was right. But the scars Rena had left wouldn't fade easily. Every time I saw a car behind me, every time I heard someone whisper my name, I felt that old paranoia creep back, the ghost of a fear I thought I'd buried. But I had survived. The weeks after the trial felt like stepping out of a fog, but even as life started returning to something like normal, there was a shadow cast over everything. The rumors died down eventually, and people at work stopped whispering, though the tension with Julie stayed. Rena's lies had shaken our relationship in ways I hadn't anticipated, and sometimes I caught her looking at me with a flicker of doubt that cut deeper than any insult Rena had ever thrown my way. One evening, Julie and I were out at a small Italian restaurant we loved. I thought a change of scenery, a quiet night just the two of us, would help us both decompress. But as we picked at our pasta, she let out a sigh, looking down at her plate. "Danny," she began softly, "do you think we could take a break? Just some time to figure things out?" I looked up, shocked. "Jules, I thought this was all behind us. Rena's out of our lives now, and things can go back to normal." "I know," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "But it's not that simple." She put doubts in my head, and I can't just shake them off. I hate to admit it, but part of me wonders, what if some of what she said was true? Her words hit like a punch to the gut, and I felt the frustration rising, my voice coming out sharper than I meant. "Julie, do you seriously think any of it was true? I thought you knew me better than that." She sighed, her eyes filling with something between sadness and regret. "I thought I did too. But this whole thing has been like living in a bad dream. I need time to sort out what I feel, who I trust. I'm sorry." I watched her leave the restaurant that night, feeling like I was losing the last good thing I had left. As if Rena had reached out from her jail cell and pulled one final string, unraveling the life I'd tried so hard to rebuild. I spent the next few months going through the motions. Work was the same, people treated me professionally, but there was a distance now. Julie's absence hurt more than I could admit, and I'd catch myself driving past her apartment at night, wondering if she'd ever call. But as days turned to weeks and then months, it became clear that she wouldn't. The holiday season came and went. The streets were lined with Christmas lights, and couples wandered through the snow, laughing and holding hands. Every shop window seemed to mock me with reminders of a life I no longer had, of a happiness that seemed a lifetime ago. One night, I got home from work, still dressed in my suit, dinner leftovers in a styrofoam container clutched in one hand. The house was dark and quiet, the kind of silence that weighed heavy, filling every corner. I tossed the keys onto the table and slumped onto the couch, staring at the blank TV screen. Then, my phone buzzed. It was from an unknown number, but I didn't need to see the name to know who it was. "Hey, Danny. It's Rena. I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I just wanted to say. I'm sorry. I'm trying to make things right." I threw the phone across the couch, my head pounding. How did she have the audacity to contact me, after everything she'd done? A few minutes later, another message came through. "I was wrong, Danny. About everything. I know it now. I wanted to hurt you, and I'm sorry. I'm trying to get help." I knew I should block the number, delete the messages, move on. But instead, I sat there staring, some twisted part of me wanting answers, needing to understand what had driven her to go to such lengths to destroy my life. Before I could think twice, I replied. "Why did you do it? What did I ever do to you?" A few minutes passed, and then her response came through. "You left. You moved on. I couldn't handle it, Danny. I thought you'd come back. But you didn't, and when I saw you with her, I wanted you to suffer the way I was suffering." I stared at the screen, anger bubbling up, but beneath it, a strange sense of pity. "It's too late for apologies, Rena. You didn't just hurt me. You ruined parts of my life I can never get back." Her reply was immediate. "I know. I know that now. But I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that I'm trying to change." I set the phone down, feeling an unexpected calm. The apology was meaningless, really. It didn't change what she'd done. It didn't bring back Julie, and it didn't erase the damage. But for the first time, I felt like maybe, just maybe, I could let it go. Not for her, but for myself. Life settled into a kind of uneasy routine after that. I didn't hear from Rena again, and eventually, her messages faded from my memory. But things changed within me. I took up running, found myself talking to friends more, even reconnected with family members I'd drifted from. And then, on a cold February night, months after everything had gone down, I ran into Julie at a bookstore. She was thumbing through a paperback, and when she looked up, our eyes met. "Danny," she said, her voice a mix of surprise and something else I couldn't quite place. "Julie." I nodded, trying to keep my voice steady, casual. We ended up talking over coffee, a long, meandering conversation that felt both familiar and foreign. She told me about her new job, the projects she was working on, and I realized with a pang of sadness that she had moved on. But as we talked, I could see a shift in her, a softening that hadn't been there before. At one point, she reached across the table, her hand brushing mine. "I'm sorry, Danny," she murmured. "I shouldn't have let her get into my head like that. I should have trusted you." "It's okay, Julie," I replied, and for the first time, I meant it. "We all have our limits. I get it." She smiled, and we sat in silence for a moment, the weight of everything that had happened between us hanging in the air. Eventually, she sighed, pushing her cup away and looking up at me with a sad smile. "So, where do we go from here?" I took a breath, feeling the words settle within me. "Forward," I said simply. Julie nodded, and we parted ways that night without promises or plans, but with a mutual understanding. She was a part of my past, a bittersweet memory that I would carry with me, but I realized then that I could go on without her. That I didn't need her to heal. The months passed, and little by little, I rebuilt my life. I bought a small house on the outskirts of Denver, started volunteering on weekends, even got a dog, a scruffy mutt named Max who became my constant companion. One night, while watching the sunset from my back porch, Max curled up beside me. I thought of Rena again. I wondered where she was, what she was doing, if she had really found the change she'd promised to seek. But the thought didn't stir any anger or resentment in me anymore, just a distant curiosity, like a book you've read and shelved, never to return to. My life had moved on, and for the first time in years, I felt peace. As the last light dipped below the mountains, casting the world in a golden glow, I looked down at Max, scratching his ears, feeling a smile tug at the corners of my mouth. The future lay ahead, unwritten, and for the first time in a long time, I felt ready to face it. Some scars remain, and maybe they always will. But they're part of me now, reminders of where I've been and how far I've come. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough.